Right. Good day, everyone. I'm Captain Gaurav Rana from Sea and Beyond. With me, I have Prateek, my colleague, who will be hosting all of you. And I'm so glad to have the presenters from IGP&I Club. I've got Annie Stowe, Captain John Dillon, and Daniel Detta, who will be presenting and who will be telling more about the IGP&I Club, what do they do, more about P&I, and a lot of information which we probably would have read it in our books, heard it from our colleagues, but the practical aspects of it, the career guidance in this space is something which we can hear directly from the people in the organization. So thank you, Annie, Captain John, and Daniela for agreeing to do this webinar, and glad to have you all around. If you move to the next slide, please, Annie. Right. So why we are doing this webinar now? When I was sailing, essentially, a lot of information that I used to get was through and through and through a friend. But direct information from a particular body, a particular company, a particular education institute was generally not available. Now with technology coming in, we believe that if you could get credible information directly from the people of an organization, it is best for us to address the relevance of it, to evaluate the relevance of it, and we could take a well-informed decision over a period of time. That decision could be, a professional decision to maybe make a career, or a decision on a particular activity which we might want to do in our professional life as such. So that's the reason why Sea and Beyond is doing this webinar. What we'll request is that you might have questions during the webinar, but we'll request you to take the questions at the end of the webinar once all the slides are finished. If you would have a question, it's a burning question, please write it in the chat window, and we will surely take it at the end. If possible, don't. Let's have very, very specific questions coming at the end only. But let's have questions, more generic questions coming in earlier, and we'll probably try and see it and share some slides of the presentation as well later on. If you could move to the next slide, please. Right. I'll quickly introduce our presenters over here. We've got Daniela, who's working as an executive of the International Group Secretariat at the P&I Clubs. She's a qualified solicitor. She qualified in 2015. And she joined the group secretariat 4 years back at the Standard Club in claims. In day-to-day, Daniela reports to Reinsurance Committee and its working groups like the group risk retention and malicious cyber. She manages the group's sustainability strategy and reporting. She works with Salvage and Large Casualty Committee, liaising with the salvage industry and maritime authorities globally. And recently, Daniela's focus includes data initiatives to enhance data collection within the group clubs. Thanks for taking out time and joining us in the webinar. It's great to have Captain John Dolan as well in the webinar. Captain John is a veteran. He started his merchant navy career as a cadet at BP Shipping. 11 years at sea on oil tankers. He then pursued higher education and earned a master's degree in science in international shipping. He transitioned ashore and became a ship manager, accumulating 23 years of experience in various key functions and senior roles within ship management. His roles encompassed commercial, marine, safety, operational, technical aspects, ultimately reaching to a director level in large shipping companies. He's currently serving as a board member of International Chamber of Shipping, representing Ireland for 5 years. He's retired from the Standard Club in 2023, where he held the position of Deputy Director, Loss Prevention, sharing his wealth of experience and knowledge with underwriters, claims, personnel, and club members on a daily basis. And we're so glad that you can share your knowledge now with all of us, John. And really, that'll be amazing to hear from you with your experience. And I'm sure, we'll go much more enriched after the webinar than what we are now. So thanks for taking out time, John. Um, and then we move to the next slide. We of course have Annie with us, and thank you, Annie, for arranging this whole webinar. And Annie, of course, is the executive of the International Group Secretariat at the International Group of P&I Clubs. She's a qualified lawyer and worked in a shipping law firm for 2 years before joining non-standard P&I Club. She worked as a claims handler over there for 7 years. And then she started to focus on professional development in 2017 when she took the role as a professional development director at North Standard P&I Club for 4 years. She joined International Group Secretariat in 2023, and her responsibilities include enhancing and expanding the group's education outreach program and coordinating with the P&I Q. And as part of our responsibility on enhancing and expanding the group's outreach, here we are, and wherein Annie has played a pivotal role in kind of getting this webinar together. So thank you so much, Annie, for having to arrange this webinar. While I've introduced the presenters, we'll take a short poll on having an introduction from the audience as well. This is just for all of us to know and the presenters to know what the audience is like. And so then, we can have our maybe answers a little bit more customized. So as your current rank, are you sailing and top four? Are you sailing at an operations level? Are you settled ashore after a sailing career, which you probably should have mentioned, but that third option is settled ashore after a sailing career, or you are of course ashore, but you've never went to sea. So how is the audience? What does the audience look like? Look forward to having as much engagement as possible. We've got about 70% of you who have voted. Ideally, we should have about 80% of you who should vote. So we'll keep the poll on for another 4-5 seconds before we close it. All right, let me end the poll and I'm going to share the results. So we've got about 40% of the people who are at top four sailing level, and 40% who have settled ashore after a sailing background, and 13% who are at an operations level sailing, and 6% who have never went to sea. So that's for all of us to just to know who's in the webinar. And I'll just take one final poll before before I hand over to you, Annie. And I'm just relaunching this poll, and this is to understand from the audience perspective, what is your understanding on the P&I Clubs role? Where do you stand? You've never heard, but you want to learn. You've never, yeah, I think we should have, the second option is wrong. But have you dealt with the P&I Clubs as a mariner or during a shore role? So those are the two options which we have right now on the polls, please. So just to know, understand what is the level of your understanding on the P&I clubs front. And yeah, we'll typically have about a minute for people to answer the polls. So yeah, I mean, most of the people over here, 75% have dealt with P&I clubs as mariner or during a shore role. So there is a bit of an understanding that people have about P&I. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it from my side, Annie, and it's over to you, please.
Thank you, Captain Gaurav. And I'm very glad that you didn't include a third option that said don't know anything about the IG, don't want to learn anything, because we are actually very glad to be here. And thank you, Sea and Beyond. Thank you, Captain Gaurav and Pratik and all your colleagues for allowing us this opportunity to present. And thank you, everybody who has joined the presentation today. I'm very honoured to be joined by my former colleagues at North Standard and my current colleague, Danielle, and my good friend, Captain John Dolan, who are very knowledgeable on both the IG and P&I Clubs. And John is particularly knowledgeable on seafaring too, and all the elements that join those two things together. So I hope that this presentation will be of good use, and the question time at the end will also be of good value. So to get us started, we have a video which actually explains things rather better than I can. So if you will allow me, shipping is a safe and hope you can hear it. Method of transportation.
Yes.
Essential to the economy. Over 90% of the world's trade is carried by sea. But the world's oceans can be harsh, and despite every best effort, maritime accidents will occasionally occur. When things do go wrong, the liabilities ship owners incur can include loss of life and personal injury, pollution damage, collision damage, wreck removal, and damage to property, as well as economic losses. These liabilities are covered by marine insurers, known as Protection and Indemnity Associations, or P&I Clubs. P&I Clubs are mutual, not-for-profit insurance associations, owned by and operated for the benefit of their shipowner members. When a maritime casualty occurs, the clubs play a unique role in delivering an experienced and effective casualty response, in addition to handling and settling the resulting claims for third-party loss and damage, as part of a system that dates all the way back to the 1800s. Between them, the leading 13 P&I clubs in the world insure every ship type, providing cover to over 90% of the world's ocean-going tonnage and over 95% of ocean-going tankers. To ensure that they are able to provide the highest limits and broadest range of insurance cover to shipowners, those 13 clubs have grouped together to form the international group of P&I Clubs. Through their participation in the group, the member clubs share claims above an individual retention via a pooling structure that is underpinned by the collective annual purchasing of the highest levels of reinsurance cover from the world's commercial reinsurance markets. This collective strength allows each club to provide the insurance cover needed by shipowners to enable their ships to trade, and to meet the compulsory insurance and financial security requirements governing maritime transportation around the globe. Many of these requirements are established by means of international treaties adopted by the International Maritime Organization, the UN specialized agency with responsibility for the safety and security of shipping and the prevention of pollution from ships. The group has consultative status at the IMO and so participates in a range of discussions with governments from around the world on behalf of its shipowner members. Through its unique knowledge and vast reach, the group is able to represent the views of shipowners on all matters relating to marine liability insurance and associated safety issues with governments, maritime authorities, regulatory bodies, and the wider shipping and insurance industries. The group is a unique force for good, responding to the insurance needs of all stakeholders and ensuring the availability and sustainability of the highest levels of insurance cover, as well as compensation for victims of maritime accidents, wherever and whenever they might occur. The International Group, collectively stronger. It might seem a bit lazy to start a presentation with a video, but it really does sum up what we wanted to give by way of background today. And we're now going to go into more detail on that. I will present on the P&I side and then pass to Danielle, who will deal with more on the international group. And then I'll mention the P&I Q before we hand over to Captain John, who will deal with more of the loss prevention and the practical side of the interaction there with P&I and the international group. So without further ado, I'm going to start on P&I. And really, as there's a video mentioned, P&I began so far back that it is very historical
And it came about because the risks, being so vast, needed to be shared between the ship owners. And that's how the very origins of P&I came together. And it was determined at the start, and still is the such. It's not for profit. It's insurance at cost. So that's, I think, something that people don't appreciate about P&I, that it goes hand in hand with the mutuality as well. Club managers handle all of the day-to-day operations and have a close relationship with ship owners, and the ship owners sit on the boards of the P&I Club. So that conversation is ongoing. And we will come back to correspondence because they're so important. But I think that it's so relevant to mention them right at the start in our first slide, that without the correspondence, the eyes and ears of all P&I clubs, claims handlers, and all parties would just not manage to get through the work that they need to do globally. Correspondents are in every port, in every important city and coastal area, or have outreach to those places. And we rely heavily on them in each P&I club. So in order to give a bit of background for anyone who really wanted to have that, and I appreciate that many of you already have this information up your sleeves, but what does P&I cover? Who is it for? Well, it covers ships, and it covers the third-party liabilities to those ships, and it's all ships of all types, sizes, and carrying who knows what. It's the IG clubs cover 90% of the world's ocean-going tonnage, and that isn't the end of the story, because we can all see that we've added the sanctions word to this slide, and sanctions are always part of the consideration of cover, and how that pieces together is a case-by-case basis that the clubs have very good knowledge of, and that goes into the underwriting conversations as well as the claims handling conversations. Poll time.
Yes. So just what does the audience feel? With whom must the loss prevention team collaborate within their P&I club? So is it the loss prevention? Is it just the claim handlers within their team is what they are required whenever their claim comes, or is it with almost everyone, the claim handlers, the underwriters, the member, and their crew? So what do you all feel? What's the correct answer? Getting good responses. We'll wait for another 10-15 seconds before we close the poll. Last 5 seconds before we close the poll. All right. Let's share the results, and Annie will tell us what's the correct answer. Annie?
The majority have the correct answer, Captain Gaurav, and very well done. And that is not to say that the first two options were not also correct, because the loss prevention team must deal with their teammates and with claim handlers, but actually they speak with everyone, and they're very much one of the major pillars of the P&I club. I will leave that for a little later, because that's the information that we can come back to. So moving back to P&I club cover, I mentioned that P&I club cover is for legal liabilities to third parties. It doesn't really give it away when I say third party liabilities. So on this slide, it really gives you all of those covers that P&I club are known for. I think the ones that are often spoken about are the personal injury claims and the cargo claims. Those are the most commonly discussed, I think, at P&I clubs and elsewhere. But we've heard of collisions, damage to fixed and floating objects regularly in news reports, and wreck removal less prevalent, thankfully. but including fines, and then there's oil pollution as well. And as a claims handler, you see all types of claims coming in from members, some more than others. And who is insured by the P&I Club? And I think it's important to really be clear about this, because P&I Clubs have a word that they use to indicate their insured party. P&I Clubs call the insured the member. A member of a P&I Club doesn't get like a badge or anything as part of their membership, or they get to be the assured. They have the insurance. The member can look different depending on the way they are set up. They might be a ship owner or charterer, technical manager, crewing manager, commercial managers. They come in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes they're jointly insured, and each P&I Club handles that differently upon in the introductory stage with the underwriters. Well, we've mentioned the things that are insured, but we always mention the things that aren't insured, just to give that full range of picture. I mean, there's loads of things that aren't insured under P&I cover. I mean, we haven't mentioned the fact that, your house insurance isn't covered under P&I, but speaking about what we have covered, but the natural assumptions have to be raised that the war cover that's an additional cover. You can buy war risk cover, and many ship owners do, but it's not covered under P&I, nor nuclear, and the others listed there. So hopefully that gives the full picture of what is and what isn't covered in this space. We wanted to raise mutuality, and indeed, I think it's important to mention that as a mutual, the idea is that ship owners invest in their insurance, and that's not the end of this story. Over the long term, the contributions that they have paid in their insurance go toward the mutual effect, so that their recovery, if there is such for claims, comes back to the members, or indeed if there is a need for more, then all the members will share in that together. It's a very cooperative approach to working together, and there are adjustments made to the premium paid by different ship owners to ensure that it's as fair as it can be. Renewal for P&I Clubs is always on the same date every year. It's on the 20th of February every single year, and sometimes the insured parties will change clubs, and that will happen. Usually it will take place on the renewal date. I've put in the pay to be paid rules. That means that upon a claim, a member has to pay the part that is agreed that they will pay before the club takes over and starts to pay further parts of the claim. So back to poll time.
Sure. And yeah, well, we're talking about P&I clubs. What does the audience think on how many P&I clubs are there in the entire world? We are, of course, managing $1 trillion risk over here, and yeah, so 10 to 20. What do you think, audience think? 20, 25, 25 to 35, more than 35? This may not be as straightforward a question as it was the earlier one. So we have more diverse answers over here, but another 20 seconds to go till for the poll to be closed. Last 5 seconds remaining. Okay, closing the poll and sharing the results. So we've got about 58% of the audience feeling is between 10 to 20. The next is more than 35, which is 19%. And then we've got other people who are feeling it's between 20 to 35. So what's the right answer, Anna?
The right answer is that if we're talking about international group P&I clubs, there are 12. That doesn't rule out the other P&I clubs that are outside of the international group, of which there are more and more. And I think that for the purposes of today, we'll stick with 12 international group P&I clubs would be the preferred answer.
All right, sure.
And now I'll hand over to Danielle, who will speak to this slide.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to pick up on one particular issue between what Annie mentioned, Hunter machinery insurance and P&I insurance. And the distinction between those two types of insurance can sometimes seem strange to outsiders because it's developed over time. When a ship is in jeopardy and needs the assistance of salvors, then this is a cost that's generally covered in the first instance by a Hunter machinery property insurer. These are costs that are being incurred to protect the vessel. But the moment that it appears that that salvage may not be successful, or that the costs of salving the vessel may actually exceed the cost of the vessel itself or the value of the vessel, that's when P&I would step in terms of a salvage versus a wreck removal operation. So P&I would cover the cost of, for example, removing a vessel's wreck. And these costs are often some of the most significant costs that we face as a group. And the very largest claims that we've faced as a group to date have been wreck removals. So the biggest examples, of course, are the Costa Concordia and the Golden Ray. The Costa Concordia was the infamous passenger vessel that grounded off Italy, had to be refloated and towed to a port where she could be scrapped. So in addition to liabilities from passengers on board, the crew, and interested local parties, the P&I Club, with the assistance of the group, which I'll talk about in a moment, covered the cost of removing the wreck from that location and restoring the environment. Next slide, please, Annie. So what's the international group? We heard a bit about this in the introductory video, so I'll go quite quickly over this slide. We're 12 marine mutual insurance associations that exist to insure and share third-party liabilities in relation to the use and operation of ships. Right now, we have over 65,000 vessels covered as a group, and over 90% of all ocean-going tankers. On the next slide, you can see the logos of all of the clubs that come together to form the international group. Now, on the next slide, I'm just going to highlight a particular page on our website, which I think is quite interesting. It's called our ship search page. And on this page, if you type any vessel's name into the search bar, it will reveal whether that ship's entered with a group club and which ship, which club insures that ship. So just a helpful plug for that page on the website if it's ever needed. Now, going on to the functions of the international group as a collective, we have three core functions. The first is that we exist to pool and reinsure large liabilities. So what that means is that we share very large claims through the pool, and then we jointly purchase high levels of reinsurance for the very largest claims. Our second function is that we act as a forum for information sharing and bringing together the knowledge and the experience of everyone in the 12 P&I clubs. And thirdly, representation is a function that we have. We try to speak with one effective voice on behalf of all of the clubs, but also all of their ship owner members to engage with governments, legislators, and maritime regulators when it comes to issues of liability. So let's look at the first function in a little bit more detail. This is pooling and reinsurance. This is the primary purpose for which the group exists. It's the purpose that we were set up to work towards. Now, this diagram shows the process of pooling and reinsurance in very, very simple terms. In short, each P&I club retains the liabilities that they incur in respect of an individual claim up to the amount of $10 million US. What we call that is the individual club retention. That amount has increased very significantly over time. So when the group was first set up, each club only insured up to about $10,000 on its own before liabilities entered the pool. Today, they insure 10 million as an individual club. When claims start to get big, so the claims between 10 million and 100 million US dollars, the claim enters what we call the pool. So the individual club remains ultimately responsible for handling the claim that's arisen, but the 12 clubs share the liability. And each year, the clubs sign a pooling agreement, and they've done that since 1899. So that means this year we're celebrating our 125th anniversary of signing that agreement. It was originally about 10 pages, now it runs to hundreds of pages, and it governs all aspects of how the clubs share their claims, including the way they contribute to one another's claims. Then above 100 million, you're getting into really, really big claims. The group collectively purchases reinsurance up to 3.1 billion US dollars. And we have around 70 different reinsurers participating in that contract, each taking small slices of the risk. And by purchasing that reinsurance together, we're able to secure the very best price for all of the ship owner members, because there is then an extraordinary spread of risk. It's really not possible to secure reinsurance at such high levels without a really, really large market share, because the potential liabilities are so high, you need that spread of risk. Next slide. Now, I'm not going to speak to this slide in much detail, but it shows that how detailed the reinsurance placement is. And what it demonstrates is the complexities of dealing with such high levels of risk. And I think the only thing I would say about this is that a reinsurer who's participating at that very top level of the program, you see this slice between 2.1 and 3.1 billion, they're insuring a very different risk from the person who's right down there at the bottom, insuring between 100 million and 750 million. The group's faced various claims within that first layer, but it's not to date faced a claim above $1.6 billion. Next slide, please. So we talked earlier about the fact that the second function of the group is that we act as a forum. How do we do that? Well, the group's work is conducted by committees, and each club is entitled to have a representative on a relevant committee, and the committee's work will be supported by at least one member of the group secretariat, someone such as me or Annie. And the committees meet intermittently to discuss issues that are raised by the clubs, and some issues require lots of extra work, so we set up working groups who investigate and report back and make recommendations. So at the moment, we've got about 40 active committees and working groups, and I've listed some of the big ones on the screen there. And they exist really to consider issues facing the group in the long term, assess and proactively manage emerging risks. I thought I'd pick up on one example of a committee that might be relevant to this audience, and that's the ship's technical committee. At group level, we've got several technically focused committees that do require the knowledge and experience of former seafarers. So I think the ship's technical committee is currently comprised predominantly of former seafarers who work within the P&I Clubs. And what this committee does is review technical issues around emerging trends. That could be anything from crane failures or losses of anchors, anything that's a topical issue. And recent work of that committee has included producing a loss prevention animation for crew that was aimed at reducing incidents that occur during mooring. The committee has also been assessing risks associated with vehicle carriers, specifically vehicle fires on board those kinds of ships, and issues around the carriage and spillage of plastic nurdles, which is a hot topic from an environmental perspective at the moment. All of these issues require strong technical knowledge, and so the group really benefits from the experience of former seafarers on issues that involve loss prevention, and I'm sure John will be able to speak further to that a little bit later. Another example of the forum function, and this is a committee that I work with, is a large casualty review working group. So every 3 years, this working group meets to consider the very largest casualties that have happened around the world, and which have been insured by the group. Major casualties and wreck removal are a really significant financial exposure for the group and for its reinsurers. So what we do is we conduct a review to try and understand what the cost drivers were and to share best practice. And recent themes in this report have included ESG in particular, but also obviously COVID a few years ago that had an impact, and we are also very focused on the impact that the local authorities have when dealing with a really significant claim. Next slide, please. Now, something that came out of this review was the need for my apologies, poll question. I think I've already answered this, so we'll see who was listening.
Yes, that's right. Let's see, but this is an interesting question, and this ties up to the first of the core functions of the group. For any industry to handle this quantum of claims, it's just mind-boggling. I mean, let's just end the poll and share the results. And yeah, I mean, more than 50% they say it's USD 1.5 billion. Daniela, you may confirm the answer, please.
Exactly. The answer is the final one, 1.5 billion, and that was the Costa Concordia.
All right. We missed this question, and if we have, can we take the another poll over here, please?
Absolutely.
All right. And this question is, for what main practical reason do US sanctions impact so much P&I work? The US has its own separate legal regime for most areas of liability. Over 70% of entered vessels fly to US flag. Most members do some trade with the US or US companies. Most P&I business is transacted in US dollars. Got another 10 seconds to answer, and then I'll close the poll. A fairly close competition over here. Yeah, we'll end the poll and share results. So it's a close competition between option A and option D. The US has its own separate legal regime, and most of the transactions are done in US dollars. What's the correct one, Daniela, please?
So I think the correct answer is the final one. Most P&I business is transacted in US dollars. And this has an impact because it means that every time you're doing a trade, you're effectively having to route yourself through the US system, which means you're often caught by the sanctions regime there. And clearly no commercial operator would want to have their bank accounts blocked and an inability to trade in US dollars. Annie, anything to add? I know this was your question.
I think you covered it perfectly, but it always reminds me of when we worked at the Standard Club, and the Standard Club, to add complexity to an already complex situation, was owned by an American company for a very short time. So we had sanctions upon sanctions upon sanctions to consider every time we wanted to pay a claim. But I think that's exactly right.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'll pick up again on our representation function. Significant casualties, the really, really big ones, are thankfully quite rare. And so not all states have recent experience of a large-scale maritime incident. And one of the recommendations that came out of the review that I was discussing before we started the poll was the need for improved liaison with government authorities. So what we're now doing as a group and as a collective of clubs is trying to establish lines of communication and share lessons that we've learned about casualty management. And we try and also ensure that states have appropriate legal frameworks to address large casualties. In some cases, we enter into a memorandum of understanding to formalise our understanding and ongoing relationship with relevant maritime administrations. And the idea is that then when a casualty occurs, the authorities are hopefully more prepared and everybody collaborates properly. Moving on to the final representation function, again, because we insure 90% of ship owners by gross tonnage across the world, the group can speak with what we call one industry voice on issues of liability and compensation. And in particular, we have a really long-standing relationship with the IMO, and we have the right to participate and comment on discussions around new legislation where that affects liability. So the big one there is limitation conventions. Going to move straight on to the correspondence, which Annie touched on at the beginning of the presentation. Now, shipping is, of course, a global industry, and incidents can occur all over the world. And when they do occur, clubs rely on a global network of what we call correspondents to assist them on the ground with claims handling. So that might include appointment of surveyors and local liaison. And correspondents are absolutely essential to the group's operation. We regularly hold correspondent conferences where we bring together all of the correspondents to discuss issues within P&I. And this year we are hosting a correspondence conference in Hong Kong in June. So now, Annie, unless you've got anything further to add there, I'm going to hand back to you to talk about the P&I qualification.
We couldn't present today without mentioning our international group P&I qualification. It really first came around in about 2012 when all the clubs were doing their own thing for education. So the clubs grouped together and said, how about we do some group training? And it transformed from that to a qualification that's now open not just to club people or just to correspondents, but to anyone in the world. And indeed, it is taken up by candidates or users of the qualification globally. We offer the exams in May and in October each year. And for the May exams, there will be roughly 580 or so exams that people will take, which is significant, given that P&I is often referred to as such a tiny niche part of what is a huge maritime industry. But I do think the P&I Q is well set out, but I would say that obviously. So modules 1, 2, and 3 are what we call the P&I Q certificate, and they give an introduction to the qualification. And you can see on the slide 4, 5, 6, and 7 delve into the specialist areas. For those who are interested in the qualification, they find 4 to 7 really quite valuable to find out more about those particular areas that are referred to in some detail in those 4 to 7, but referred to in 1 to 3 as well. And module 8 is the essay question paper, which gives candidates an opportunity to use all of the knowledge they gained in 1 to 7 and apply it to an application question using real case scenarios. And indeed, the textbooks are written by P&I Q, P&I experts from clubs, reviewed every year by people in clubs, and filled with practical case examples and the cases that have happened in the past. We also have a scholarship program for the P&I Q, each year in November, we open the application, and it's open to anyone in the world. And in order to specially recognise our correspondent link that Danielle has referred to, we offer 2 to 3 scholarships just for correspondent applicants, but 3 to 4 to general scholars. And you can see on this slide that the applications we received in November and December of last year, and that were reviewed in January of this year, were really from all around the world, and the applications were excellent to read. And you can see that in 2022, when we first started the scholarship program, 2 P&I Q scholars were given out. And now, last year, there were so many good applications that in 2023, we awarded 5 scholarships. And this year we were blown away, and we felt that it would be remiss to award anything less than 7. And the trend hopes, certainly the Education Committee, who are responsible for the P&I Q and the P&I Q scholarship program, hope that this number will continue to grow. So if that is of interest, keep an eye on the IG website and the P&I Q pages toward the end of the year. And now, the bit you've all been waiting for. I'm going to hand over to you, Captain John, if that's okay.
Indeed, Annie, I'm delighted. Thank you very much indeed. And as a kind of an introduction, having recently retired, my career really has been dominated by this process, a bit of a cliche in some regards, but of lifelong learning. And even though I've been involved in the P&I sector for the last 9 years, having been in shipping all my life, even this morning, listening to the presentation, there are many aspects I've picked up on, which is effectively the message of the day, that we're constantly learning, and well done indeed. Some very interesting material there. But about the role of loss prevention very specifically, I'm going to, you can see on the slide there fairly self-evident thoughts, and I'm going to add my own thoughts to each one of the points made. So the building good relationships, my own section and department in the Standard Club, I will use that as a case study. But loss prevention, first of all, building good relationships with the claims personnel and the underwriters, as well as the insured party, that's the member, and to support collective collaboration and collective learning and continuous improvement. Now, that's a very broad, grand statement, but what it actually means in practice was when I would be working with my colleagues, we would be talking daily to the underwriters who would be looking at the risks of proposals coming into the club, and we would be asked as former mariners, my colleagues and I, to give our views on diverse issues like the nature of the trade, the quality of the ship, where it was built. We would be gathering information, public domain stuff from the usual sources that most of you will be very familiar with, like PSC material, US Coast Guard, Equasis, CWeb, all sources to try and help the underwriter distill that information down to a yes, no, maybe type of decision. Also, the claims people would rely heavily on us as well, particularly in relation to casualty investigation. But also, most importantly, to provide information to avoid the claims happening in the first place, hence the name claim loss prevention. So providing cargo advice on a daily basis to the members, technical advice then to the claims personnel themselves as to what might have happened when a claim did arise, why it shouldn't happen again in the future. And then we also would provide claims non-technical information as well, and training as well for the non-technical staff. And in the middle, then, if we weren't talking to underwriters and to claims personnel, we would be conducting the ship's inspection program, and we would, what we would call them as risk reviews. We're not out there as a kind of quasi port state inspectors. We're looking at it purely from marine risk perspective. But we would also talk to the members and see what their safety systems were like and what their management controls were like as well. All very, very useful and in many cases essential information for the underwriters as well. And then promoting and disseminating valid information, up-to-date information that would help the members generally in the club. The second point there was managing the club's P&I survey program. Well, that also is a major area for some P&I clubs. Some P&I clubs take a very light touch towards actual surveys. Others were a little bit more diligent, and the Standard Club was one of those. And just now, of course, the Standard Club has merged with the North Club to make one of the biggest clubs in the world. And their program, when I was leaving it last year, had a target of 650 ship surveys around the world. We would look at all ship types, but those particularly of interest would be those operating in stressed sectors. Clearly, and this is where the mariners, will be very familiar, if the markets are poor for a prolonged period of time, then the ship's technical standards can suffer, not necessarily will, but can suffer. And it's incumbent upon the P&I clubs to look after their other members by making sure that there are risks not left uninvestigated in their fleet. So that's why we would do principally the survey program. We take a practical view of the risks as well. As I said, we're not there as port state inspectors, so we will advise the captain, advise the owners on issues that arise there, with the idea of not resulting in any detentions of vessels. We have an aligned interest as a P&I club with the membership. The supporting the members for best practices and providing important cargo specific information. This is a really important function, and this is the key function that builds mostly upon the experience of the mariners in the loss prevention departments. And if I cite the North Standard again as an example, we would have in that team about 14 master mariners. We had 2 marine engineers, 2 naval architects, a class surveyor, and a data analyst. Those were the key guys and ladies as well, who would provide and recycle their own experience and expertise. A huge and wide background of marine expertise into the loss prevention team, and all of that experience was then tapped on to recycle back into the membership. The fourth point there, maintaining a good knowledge of developments in the regulatory landscape and providing guidance to the mariners. Well, as senior mariners yourselves, and the fact that you're sitting in on this call, it suggests that that's your professional curiosity and interest is being maintained as well. And that's a really important point when it comes to the regulations. The landscape, as you will all know, SOLAS, STCW, MLC, environmental legislation, the new fuels, the ECAS, for example, DG cargoes, a wide area of marine operations is constantly evolving a new legal framework, and it's incumbent upon all the P&I clubs and the loss prevention departments in particular to maintain their knowledge and up to date with the regulatory developments. And by doing that, point number 5 is a kind of natural development of that. It's participating and contributing in a wide variety of industry bodies and at industry conferences. And that was a large part of my job and my co-colleagues as well in the Standard Club, but all of the P&I Club loss prevention partners will have a similar view as well. Going out, meeting the members, attending conferences, presenting on issues of the day is a very, very big deal. Sharing information is a really big deal, particularly in relation to safety. Nobody has what we would say, a proprietary interest in safety exclusively. It's there to be shared. We have all an aligned interest amongst the P&I clubs and amongst the wider shipping industry to ensuring the safety of the vessels that we insure. And typically, just in my own experience, some of the bodies that I got involved in over my period in the club, both Danielle and Annie mentioned, I think, the Ship State Technical Committee. That's one of the blue ribbon committees that real focus on technical standards and operating standards in the marine industry. But I also was participating in the Cargo Incident Notification System, known as SINS, which was looking at primarily DG cargoes and container ships. But I was also involved in the Pilotage Committee. I chaired it for a number of years, which was looking at claims arising where pilots were on board the vessels at the time of the incident. A large vessel casualty working group as well. I was representing the Standard Club on that committee and stepping in as well at the IG representative. So others are, Danielle, I think, mentioned as well, the Vehicle Carrier Safety Forum, and relatively new working group, but also looking at the risks of car carriers specifically. I cite those as just an example of why and where loss prevention staff get involved in these various fora. It's really important for people working in the loss prevention function to maintain the currency of their knowledge and up to date as much as they possibly can do so. So that is a very, very short description of loss prevention and the role it plays in the P&I Club itself. Primarily staffed with mariners, long experience, recycling their experience back to the membership for the improvement, continuous improvement of safety standards. Thank you.
That was very useful, Captain John. And let's just take this poll and as you mentioned, that continuous development is important, and that's honestly one of the reasons why many of us are here. And so this is just one poll on understanding from the audience whether you're interested to know more about the P&I qualification program. And yeah, I mean, the engagement between C and Beyond and IG Group P&I is probably not just limited to one webinar, but probably different other sections, different other topics as well. So would this topic be of interest to the webinars? And that's the second question in this poll. Would you want a separate session only focused on the membership or the qualification program as such? Let's have a quick last 5 seconds remaining for us to end the poll. And yeah, let me share the results. So yeah, most of us do need to know about want to know about more about this qualification program, and they may want a separate session as well. So Annie, maybe we could plan for something on these lines. And yeah, I guess that's pretty much the end of the presentation, right? And we can have it open for the question and answers from the attendees. And we've got a couple of questions already coming through. But let me start, with myself, and I have a question for you, John. Um, uh, so for example, for a mariner, right, and when that person enters into a sailing industry, when he goes and sails, there is a set path for the person. He goes as a cadet, he comes out as a chief engineer or a master. Now, when a person is transitioning, that's a little bit, where can he go, what can he do, how can he go? Those are the things within a person is a little bit confused. Now, if a person wants to enter into, say, P&I, right, as a maybe as a correspondent or as part of the club in the loss prevention side, is there a definitive career path, or if you could suggest, what are the best ways for a person to possibly get into this side of things on the claim side, on the P&I side, if you could guide us on that. And maybe Annie, we could stop sharing the presentations as well now. Yeah. Over to you, John.
Captain Gaurav, I think that's a really interesting question. The fact is, the P&I clubs are always going to require some maritime expertise in-house on staff. So there's going to be a P&I loss prevention function existing certainly for a long time to come. How does one actually get into that? Well, despite my age, I'm really only 21 here, guys. But the fact is, long experience is helpful to join the loss prevention function. If not all, you don't have to have wide experience, but it certainly helps. In other words, if mariners wish to come ashore and they wish to express an interest in joining the loss prevention functions, what helps greatly is to have width of experience. If you've been on a bulker, container ship, a tanker, or with some experience of many ship types, that's a distinct advantage. Simply because when you arrive in to the loss prevention function, you're going to be asked a lot of questions, both internally from your underwriters and from your claims people, but also from the membership as well. I could have mentioned earlier on, just to give a perspective on that, Captain Gaurav, that the North Standard this year is likely to receive something of the order of 4,500 inquiries from the membership on all aspects of ship operations, trading, cargoes. You can imagine any kind of issue relating to the operation, unsafe operation of a vessel, ports. So the width of experience is great. Now, that's fleshing out the answer to your question about how does one get in there. Well, clearly, if you have an interest in this area, then applying directly to each of the individual P&I clubs, maybe through the HR function, or if you have a contact in the clubs existing, you have a friend who actually works in the P&I, in the loss prevention function, or indeed is a claims handler, or indeed is an underwriter. A quiet approach to them just to find out what it's like and if there's an opportunity there. I have to say it's a very unsophisticated, because it's so niche, it's relatively unsophisticated. A cold letter directly to HR can be as effective as any way of starting the process of applying. But I would say that a couple of traits are necessary. One, of course, I mentioned is their wide experience, but two, of course, is this belief, this absolute commitment to lifelong learning, because you can imagine 4,500 queries this year. You're going to be learning a huge amount, and it can be overwhelming. In fact, it is overwhelming in the first months, 6 months, 12 months, perhaps. But as you grow in your professional knowledge, it becomes a little obviously easier with time, for sure. But that's a kind of broad description of what's involved in it, and how to approach if you have an interest in getting into it. I would say also, and this is back to Annie's territory, that the P&I Q exams are very, very helpful as a general knowledge to the industry. but they're particularly relevant for those people who join into the P&I clubs, particularly for mariners coming ashore, because it's a quick way of getting a very mariners coming into loss prevention, I should say, but because it's a quick way, an accelerated way of acquiring deep subject matter knowledge in a relatively short period.
Thank you so much, John. And this examination probably would also show the person is inclined for continuous learning because the person is
agreed. Yes, correct. Indeed, no extra qualification is too much. You know, when you're in the business of selling yourself, the better you presented your CV, the better content on your CV, of course, is competitive advantage. So that's a fairly obvious statement, I think, but necessary sometimes to say.
And I would add to that whereas I highly rate the P&I qualification and professional development and continuous learning, I think it's important to note that no club would expect any applicant for a position in a loss prevention role to have already taken the P&I qualification. That would be just as much something that applicant might show an interest in doing once they join a loss prevention team,
Sure.
because it's not within everybody's remit to take this qualification or any qualification and all of the extra bits of that financially and time-wise before taking on a role. And I think the IG is abundantly aware of that. And just to add to John's comments, which I fully back, of course, I think when people have asked me this question with a claims focus, because of course those kinds of conversations come my way from time to time, I often refer people who might be interested in a role in an IGP&I club to look at the LinkedIn profiles for the different clubs, because I think each club presents themselves and their culture and their focus in a different way on LinkedIn. And whereas you can't really know the culture of an organization until you join it, I do think there is a perception that all 12 clubs are the same, but that isn't the case. And I think all of them are unique in their own way. And some of that comes across, I think, in LinkedIn and following there, and also, of course, on their websites.
Sure. Thank you so much, both of you, for your inputs. And what is good to know, and Captain John, nowadays is that the experience ashore or experience on sailing is valued a lot over here, because a lot of the jobs which come nowadays, they probably would like a mariner who's young and maybe a couple of years in command, but is mentioning that wide range of experience across vessels, that's probably more beneficial, or that's probably better because you've now dealt with multiple cases and which you can leverage in your job. And very well in points on the membership, on having a look at the LinkedIn, and of course then everyone knows you can go to the website and apply to the HR. So thank you for that. Let's go back to the questions which have come on the chat window. I've got a question from Gajanan Bhosle, and probably he's picked it up from the presentation, and he's asking, what is joint hull inspection with regards to P&I? Annie, would you want to take this on the okay.
I'd be delighted. And the question, remind me, please, Captain Gaurav, remind me of the question.
Yeah, it's what is the joint hull inspection with regards to P&I?
The joint hull inspection. John, if you want to jump in.
I might take that. In fact, the P&I and the hull inspectors, they have a very different approach to the marine risk that they're looking at. Now, occasionally they will, for brevity, there will be, and I have been involved in appointing joint surveys, but it's not something that the P&I Club would naturally and normally do. It's just, but if and when it does take place, it's just one surveyor, or perhaps two surveyors, but doing it at the same time, because that's the window of opportunity to go on board a ship and assess it. But the an inspection for the P&I is a very different risk appraisal than for the narrow technical adequacy of the ship, which would be the hull machinery in the inspector's focus.
Sure, John. Thank you. Got a question from B.S. Bhargav, but I'm not sure what does LOU mean. Mr. Bhargav, if you could write down what does LOU mean, maybe we can take your question. And
Letter of undertaking.
letter of undertaking. All right. So his question is, what is the legal status of LOU, which is letter of undertaking, issued by P&I Clubs in case of cargo claims? Can a consignee follow up with P&I for payments not done against LOU?
That will depend on a case-by-case basis. The legal standing depends on what law is being applied, what the claim is, and what has been agreed with the club. But if a club has agreed to issue an LOU to in conjunction with the member, in the case of a cargo claim, then it's not necessarily an open and shut end of the story scenario that a case will be paid. It's more an agreement to look into it, an agreement that there will be club cover in the event of the cargo claim unraveling and finding out what is what. So can the consignee follow up for payments not done against the LOU? I think the answer, and this is such an annoying answer, but I think it depends. I think it would depend on the case, on the situation, on all of the legal jurisdiction considerations. Sorry.
That's fine. I think it's difficult probably to give a very objective answer after.
If you give me all the bits of the claim, I could review the claim as a whole. But I think we would do ourselves an injustice if we were to answer that with a clear yes or a no.
All right. Thanks, Annie, for your answer. And we've got a question from Anuj, and Anuj, we may not be able to show the sheet, but maybe we can take the first part of the question, which is, what is the role of average adjuster? John, would you like to take that question, or Annie, I don't know, would you want to take that up?
Eddie, well, help me out here, Eddie. When I flounder, obviously, with this answer, but an average adjuster is simply, to my understanding, somebody who casts a very cold eye over a particular claim and all of the various bills that have been submitted in relation to a particular claim. And the justice then is simply to preside over the apportionment of the various costs to the various parties who may have a stake in the claim. That is I've worked closely, physically closely. In fact, they used to be in the bench beside me when we were in the office in London. But it's such a specialized area that they often kept very much to themselves on the adjustment work. So it's an area I never really got involved into any great detail. So Annie, if I've missed something there that's glaringly obvious, please chip in.
No, I think that's exactly it. In a claim where a vessel declares general average, the P&I Club will not advise the member where or how, but the member will make that declaration of GA, and upon declaring GA, general average, they will appoint that average adjuster, and they will do that cold, detailed, very specialized work in adjusting. and deal with the apportionments, and the club will wait, and it can take years. I mean, for some claims, in particular one that I dealt with, the MSC Flaminia, it took years, and the adjustment was very long awaited and long considered when it did arrive. I think that it's quite a career of its own, and I'm not sure that it lies. It probably deserves a whole seminar of its own, actually.
Yes, I would say so.
Sure. Thanks, John and Annie, for your answers. Question from Rajendra, that seems to be a good question. How does the club handle a clash of interest between ship owners and charterers?
If this question refers to a claim in which the ship owning member has a claim against the charterer, who is also a member of the P&I Club, it's really very simple. The club will ensure that there is two very different teams dealing with one membership and the other. The claim will never be discussed internally, and indeed in internal meetings, if that claim is discussed, one or other of the teams will immediately say, we are not permitted to speak about this claim in this forum. So it's a very clear conflict wall to make sure that there is no breach. And also the internal file and file management system is locked because it has a conflict, so that there is no information sharing. And the effect is such that it would be as if a different club were handling on behalf of the ship owner, and a different club were handling on behalf of the chartered entry, because they can keep so completely separate.
Yep. Have you had experience wherein this has happened, and just to understand more practically, while we can say this to both the parties, and how do they react? If you could share your experience around it as well.
It happens actually much more than perhaps you'd think. It's so much a common part of a claims handler's awareness, and indeed, and the underwriting and loss prevention teams as well, loss prevention underwriting teams all together, that we're all abundantly aware of what we deal with the conflict files. It's not always even so clear cut as just being the ship owner versus the charterer in direct conflict. It can also be if there's a charter party involving many different parties, some of who may be members for other ownership. So the club has to keep very well on top of all of who is involved in which entity and how that may affect any other conflicts. In a practical sense, the claim will come in, and immediately a claims handler will enter the information to set up a file. The file management system itself will alert the claims handler to any potential conflict as soon as another claims handler enters in the conflict file. So that will immediately put the application on notice, and the claims handlers will be on notice as well. So everybody's on their guard. And I think whilst we're speaking practically, it comes down again to the correspondence. Now, that is a big part of conflict management for a claims handler, because if you have a claim in, let's say, for argument's sake, Liverpool, there's a claim in Liverpool in the UK, the ship owning member reaches out to the correspondent there. Now, the correspondent is best to either set up a conflict file where they have one person handling for the ship owner and one person for the charterer, or best case scenario would be to have two different correspondent companies. So the claims handlers will keep alive of that. And I think that is probably no different to even if it were handled by two different IGP&I clubs. If I heard that the Swedish club, for example, had instructed one correspondent, a different club may then think to find an alternative option, as well with the experts and the consultants too. That would all be part of a claims handler's thinking process. And then if we're thinking about at the international group level, if a claim has gone through the levels of the pooling agreement, as Danielle discussed, and as per that diagram that she showed us, again at international group level, if that claim is ongoing and there are different clubs handling it, the reporting will be kept such that any conflict of interest will be minimized, and that the reporting will only be as per the requirement at the minimum level to ensure that no conflict issue arises and that no confidentiality is breached.
Thanks, Annie. Thanks, Annie. That's very helpful. And yeah, I think you've answered the question in a very holistic manner. Fernandel, you have a very specific question. I'm sorry, it's difficult to probably take it in this forum. What you can do is you can write to us on education@cnbeyond.com, and we'll try and answer you, one-to-one. But I think what Annie had mentioned about the P&I Q exams, I think that's one area where you could, which could help you in your continuous development as well. Going down and taking in questions. I've got a couple of direct questions as well, and wherein I think it's the same, and another couple of questions from Avinash and Prakyat. What they're asking is if a person wants to essentially enter into the P&I sector or in the loss prevention, how do they enter? And that was my first question as well. So just maybe if you could also advise Annie, that is the P&I Q qualification a prerequisite to enter into this career, or it's a or does it really help a lot, or it's a very good to have qualification?
The first part of the question, I can easily answer that you definitely do not need the P&I qualification to enter into this career and into this industry. You don't need it at all. Arguably, a person could come in and prosper without ever taking a P&I qualification. I think for the right person at the right time in their life, if they feel that they've looked into it and it's of interest, then the P&I qualification is right for them. But I think that I tread very carefully on making any firm recommendations, because I think, as I said before, I think the P&I qualification is just right for those who have applied to a position and have achieved the position, and then they can start their career in an IGP&I club with the P&I Q. But equally, for those who are interested before they take a position, that's completely a personal choice. But I would just say that there's no guarantee that if you do a qualification that you would necessarily get a position. And I think that that's worth saying, because we need to be really honest about these kinds of things to make sure that people only undertake what they want to do. It's enough, isn't it, already being a hardworking person, but to take on additional education, it has to be just right for the right person at the right time.
Sure. I would just add to that as well, though, that the early modules of the P&I Q examination are very complementary to the kind of work that most mariners would have covered, certainly master mariner levels. They would have experience of it. So it wouldn't be such a great leap to go and get those two modules under their belt. And indeed, if somebody then was applying to enter loss prevention function, who could say, well, actually, I've studied one or two modules and I've been successful at it, then that would be a very good sign, back to what Gaurav said earlier, of commitment and interest and motivation. So from that point of view, I think it's certainly worth considering. And also the fact that the P&I Q examination and the knowledge gained through the study in that qualification has wide application in the marine industry, not just in P&I insurance, but into port agency or maybe port operations or ship management as well. So it has wider application in the business as well. But I accept that a person shouldn't necessarily go headlong in committing to doing the full course and then say, well, now I've qualified, what's my job? It doesn't work like that. And therefore, any person who's contemplating doing that should be do a little bit more research on what the reality would actually be.
Sure. Thanks, John, for that. So, John, question to you. And while what you mentioned is that persons with wide experience, more experience, and probably, at a level of a master chief engineer, those are the guys whom with their experience they can give back and utilize their experience in this field. How about persons that are maybe a fourth engineer, a third officer, second officer level, and operations level? Now, if they would like to enter, is that experience enough? And B, if at all it is, what are the roles that possibly would be the right fit at that level?
It's certainly relevant. Is it sufficient? That is very much a case-by-case basis. If a loss prevention department of one of the P&I clubs was looking for a technical assistant, for example, who doesn't have the Master Mariner or Chief Engineer qualification, but who does have relevant experience, then certainly that person would be considered for sure. But there would be no guarantees, and it is a very small market, so it wouldn't be discounted. That application would not be discounted for sure, but it would be challenged versus the competition who would come in with higher qualification. But God loves a trier, Gaurav. If you don't ask, you don't get. So why not? And the point is, the mariners, and we come from a marine background. We're trained around being can do. You don't give up at the first hurdle. So why not? The person who offers in and applies, who's confident in their ability, who knows what experience they have and its relevance and importance, can, quote Annie, can prosper.
Thank you. Let's take the last 2-3 questions, and there's a question from one of the members, and it was, would the club also issue a hull and machinery insurance as well?
No, I think the clearest answer is that hull and machinery is largely excluded. If the question is because sometimes clubs are involved, it's because there is sometimes an agreement within the underwriting within 1/4 or 3/4. But I think the easiest way is just to say it's excluded, but P&I clubs will discuss with H&N hull and machinery where claims arise, and there's a merge of the two, or there's involvement of both insurers.
Rajendra.
Part of the pooling agreement, if we go back to where Danielle talked us through the diagrams and the levels, that doesn't apply to chartered entry insurance from a P&I club. So it is what we would call additional cover. That doesn't mean that it doesn't count. It fully counts it, and chartered entry is very valuable to a P&I club in the same way. As to what type of charter are we saying, bareboat, time charterers, voyage charterers, I think all charterers are valid charterers, but again, it depends on the member's profile. Not any ship owner is insurable by a P&I club, and there are certain requirements before a P&I entry is permissible. So I think that probably goes partly into that question.
Sure. the nature of the trade as well, and the whole profile of the member would be closely scrutinised. Not every charter is the same as every other charter, so there's stating the obvious, but there are very specific concerns related to some trades that would need very careful consideration.
Sure. Thank you. I will take this last question from Arun, and this is on technically, is there a upper limit on the P&I claim allowed, unlike other limitation of liability?
That is a good question to finish on. Always save the best
It
for
is.
last, eh?
Yes, that is a killer. That is a really good question.
I like a challenge. God loves a tryer, John. So here I go. I'm gonna give it a try. There is an upper limit on poolable cover. So P&I claim has been referred to in Aaron's question. Limitations of liability will be part of the upper limit of claim. I think for the question to really get the proper answer I want to give it, I'm going to give another lawyer's answer. I want to know all about the claim that Aaron wants to have the question answered. Limitation will be part of any end scenario to a claim. There is an upper limit because there's the end of the Hydra reinsurance. But as Danielle said, we've never even gone past 1.6. So what am I missing? I'm trying to understand what we really want answered. I think the answer is there is a limit on what is possible within the reinsurance capability if we're talking about poolable cover. There is a limit of limitation, but the limitation that the P&I upper limit reinsurance level has never been breached. So I think we're safe for now. Do you think that does it? Do you think I did I do okay?
Absolutely. I think you summarized it very well.
Thank you.
Right. Fine. I think we've taken 1.5 hours, and a lot of questions have been answered. We can go back enriched, but let's take one final poll from the audience in terms of the feedback. When you had come, the audience, you had certain expectations about the webinar. Were they met? Were they unmet? Did you exceed them? Was the session useful for you? Was the time you spent, was it useful? And how would you rate the session, please? And of course, if you've had any comments, any suggestions for us to improve, and maybe any suggestions on the next set of webinar, please do write to us. You can write on the chat window or write to us on education@cnbeyond.com, and we'll try and hold similar kind of webinars, similar kind of sessions as well. And yeah, I look forward to your feedback. That's very useful. That's very helpful for us to keep on improving. So we've got about 70% of you who have answered. A few more answers would be really helpful. All right, I'll end the poll and share the results. So yeah, for most of you, at least you found this session useful, and we were able to meet your expectation, or for most of you exceeded the expectation. So that's good to know. A big thanks to Annie for really putting this together, and of course Daniel, and of course Captain John, for you to come and spend time. I go a lot more knowledgeable than what I was a couple of hours back, and I'm sure that will be the case for most of the audience as well. Thank you to all the audience, to all the attendees for being here as well. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for having us, and thank you for joining us, everybody who's made the time today. It was a real pleasure.
Indeed, it was indeed a great pleasure. Always learning. That's the key to this.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you. To the attendees, if we were not able to answer your question, you can probably just email us on education@HC and beyond. I'll see if I can get some answer from Annie, or if there's some other expert. We will try and get back to you. And thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye now. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.